December 10, 1941, 3:17 a.m., the North Atlantic, 400 miles west of Ireland. A howling gale whipped the frigid sea into a churning black abyss. Waves, easily 30 feet high, crashed over the bow of HMS Bramble, a Flower-class corvette, throwing spray across her exposed deck. Visibility was less than 50 yards, a thick, freezing fog clinging to the water like a shroud. Below deck, the rhythmic groan of the ship battling the tempest was a constant, unsettling companion. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Reed, barely 5 feet tall, her face streaked with grime and exhaustion, peered through the spray-lashed windows. Her knuckles were white, gripping the railing. She was 24 years old, and in the last 72 hours, she'd watched 2 of her sister ships vanish without a trace. Each time, the same chilling sonar ping had preceded the silence, a German U-boat hunting in the dark. Just then, the hydrophone operator's voice, strained and urgent, cut through the din. "Contact, bearing 270, range 600 yards and closing, sir, fast." Evie's eyes narrowed, a cold dread coiling in her gut. 600 yards. In this maelstrom, it was practically point blank. The U-boat, U-552, commanded by the infamous Red Devil Erich Topp, was renowned for its audacious night attacks, surfacing briefly to launch torpedoes before diving back into the inky depths. A ghost in the storm. "All ahead flank," Evie barked, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Hard to port, depth charges, stand by." The Bramble lurched violently as the helmsman wrestled the wheel. Water surged over the deck, threatening to sweep away any man foolish enough to be caught outside. Evie knew their chances were slim. The U-boat was likely at periscope depth, waiting, a predator unseen. Every second was an eternity. She could almost feel the German commander's eyes on them, calculating. The fate of their convoy, laden with vital supplies for a beleaguered Britain, rested squarely on her shoulders. One false move, one moment of hesitation, and they would join the growing list of ships at the bottom of the Atlantic. The cold, relentless sea was about to claim another victim. Evelyn Reed's story didn't begin amidst the chaos of war, but in the quiet, sun-drenched fields of rural England. Born in 1917, the daughter of a mathematics professor and a renowned cartographer, Evie was a child of numbers and maps. Her earliest memories weren't of dolls or tea parties, but of sprawling blueprints spread across the dining room table, her father patiently explaining calculus, or her mother teaching her the intricate art of triangulation using nothing but a compass and a piece of chalk. "Precision, Evie," her mother would say, drawing a perfect circle on the blackboard, "is the language of the world. Even a fraction of a degree can change everything." By the age of 10, Evie could navigate by the stars, calculate ballistic trajectories for imaginary cannon fire, and plot a course across a topographic map with astonishing accuracy. Her mind was a finely tuned instrument, absorbing data, identifying patterns, and solving complex problems with an intuitive grace that belied her years. She excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and physics, often astounding her teachers with her unique approaches to geometry and trigonometry. While other girls her age dreamt of romance and social graces, Evie found her solace in the elegant logic of numbers. The shadow of war, however, would soon eclipse her idyllic childhood. In the late 1930s, as the drums of conflict grew louder across Europe, Evie, now a brilliant young woman, found herself drawn to the nascent field of operational research. She joined the Women's Royal Naval Service, RENS, in 1939, eager to apply her formidable intellect to the looming crisis. But the Navy, deeply entrenched in tradition, was a man's world. Her initial assignments were mundane, clerical work, decoding messages. She yearned for more, for a chance to contribute her unique skills. Her turning point came during a dreary afternoon in the Admiralty's cramped planning rooms. She overheard a frustrated officer lamenting the abysmal success rate of anti-submarine patrols. The U-boat threat was escalating, sinking Allied shipping at an unsustainable rate. Casualties were mounting daily. Evie, emboldened by a quiet desperation, stepped forward. "Sir," she said, her voice small but firm, "perhaps I could offer a different perspective." She proceeded to dissect the existing tactical reports, pointing out subtle biases in patrol patterns, miscalculations in target acquisition, and the critical flaw in the depth charge deployment doctrine. Her analysis, backed by precise mathematical models she'd developed in her spare time, was a revelation. It was unorthodox, challenging established naval wisdom, but undeniably brilliant. Impressed despite himself, the officer arranged for her to be transferred to the Western Approaches Command, the front line of the U-boat war. It was there, amidst the grim reality of constant losses, that Evie's true potential would be forged. The Battle of the Atlantic was a brutal existential struggle. By 1941, German U-boats, operating in devastating wolf packs, had brought Britain to the brink of starvation. Convoys, vital lifelines of food, fuel, and munitions, were being decimated. The statistics were horrifying. In October 1941 alone, German U-boats sank over 400,000 tons of Allied shipping. Each sunken merchant vessel represented lives lost, supplies denied, and a tightening noose around the British Isles. British naval doctrine, honed over centuries, was proving inadequate against the cunning and technological superiority of the U-boat. Destroyer and corvette captains were trained to detect submarines via ASDIC sonar, track them, and then drop patterns of depth charges over their last known position. The theory was sound, but the reality was a grim lottery. Here, why it failed. 1. The blind spot effect. As a ship passed over a submerged U-boat to drop depth charges, the ASDIC beam, which projected downwards, would lose contact with the submarine directly beneath the attacking vessel. This created a critical blind spot during the most crucial phase of the attack. The U-boat, even if briefly detected, would vanish from the sonar screen just when the attacking ship needed to confirm its position. 2. U-boat evasion tactics. German U-boat commanders were masters of evasion. Upon hearing the telltale ping of ASDIC, they would execute violent turns, dive to extreme depths, or deploy Pillenwerfer, chemical cartridges that created false sonar echoes, confusing their pursuers. 3. Depth charge inaccuracy. Dropping depth charges was, at best, an educated guess. The explosion radius of a single depth charge was limited to inflict significant damage. Multiple charges needed to explode in close proximity to the U-boat's pressure hull. Without precise targeting, most depth charge attacks were little more than psychological harassment. 4. The weather factor. The North Atlantic was a force unto itself. Gales, fog, and colossal waves severely hampered surface vessels. ASDIC performance deteriorated, visual spotting became impossible, and maintaining course for a depth charge run was a nightmare. For U-boats, often smaller and more agile, such conditions offered ideal cover. Evie witnessed the toll firsthand. The constant grim reports, the exhausted faces of returning crews, the empty berths in the mess hall. Her close friend, Lieutenant Commander George Maxwell, captain of HMS Gladiolus, had been lost with his entire crew just weeks prior, a victim of a coordinated wolf pack attack. The rage and despair fueled her determination. There had to be a better way. The conventional methods were sending good men to their deaths. The challenge felt insurmountable. It was during a particularly grueling debriefing session, after yet another convoy had been savaged, that Evie proposed her insane chalk trick. The room, filled with battle-hardened, skeptical commanders, fell silent. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice unwavering, "our current depth charge doctrine is based on the assumption that we must destroy the U-boat. I propose we focus on something simpler, disorienting it, forcing it to surface, and then engaging it with deck guns." A ripple of uneasy murmurs went through the room. Engaging a U-boat on the surface, even a damaged one, was considered extraordinarily dangerous. Their deck guns were powerful, their crews well-drilled. It was anathema to established naval tactics. "And how," scoffed Captain Thompson, a gruff veteran with a chest full of medals, "do you propose we achieve this disorientation, Lieutenant Reed?" With a stiff upper lip and a kind word. Evie walked to a large blackboard dominating one wall. She picked up a piece of chalk. "We have two fundamental problems," she explained, drawing precise diagrams as she spoke. "The ASDIC blind spot and the U-boat's evasive maneuvers once we lose contact. My solution bypasses both." She then outlined her proposal, which quickly became known, often with a sneer as Evie's folly or the chalk trick. It was, in essence, a radically altered depth charge pattern executed with surgical precision, designed not to destroy, but to herd and shock. The chalk trick explained. Evie's core innovation was to completely rethink the depth charge drop. Instead of dropping a pattern directly over the last known position, she proposed a series of 3 precisely timed single depth charges, deployed in a specific sequence, forming an invisible chalk mark in the water. 1. The marker charge. Upon initial ASDIC contact, a single depth charge was to be dropped ahead of the U-boat's projected path, not directly on it. This charge would explode at a shallower depth, e.g. 50 feet. The purpose was not damage, but to create a violent shockwave, forcing the U-boat to react. The key was to drop it before the surface ship passed directly over the U-boat, thus avoiding the blind spot. 2. The herd charges 2 charges. Crucially, the ship would then immediately execute a sharp turn, and at precisely calculated intervals, drop 2 more single-depth charges, 1 to port and 1 to starboard, further along the U-boat's assumed escape vector. These would also be shallow. The combined effect of these 3 strategically placed explosions, creating a triangular shockwave pattern, would be devastating to a submerged crew. The violent concussions, amplified underwater, would disorient, damage delicate instruments, and induce panic. A U-boat commander, suddenly rocked by multiple explosions from unexpected angles, would lose all sense of direction, believing they were under a direct, devastating attack from multiple points simultaneously. The natural instinct would be to surface immediately, even if damaged, to assess the situation. It's a psychological weapon, Evie concluded, her chalk tapping the board. We don't need to sink them underwater, we just need to make them think they're sinking. The concept was dangerous because it required an unprecedented level of navigational accuracy and timing from the attacking ship. A miscalculation of even a few seconds or a slight deviation in course would render the entire maneuver useless. Furthermore, it involved exposing the corvette to a potentially undamaged U-boat on the surface, where the U-boat's heavier deck gun could inflict serious damage. It challenged every instinct of naval combat. But Evie argued with passion and data that the current methods were simply not working. Desperate times called for desperate measures. After fierce debate, and with the backing of a few open-minded senior officers, Evelyn Reed was finally given command of a corvette, the HMS Bramble, and granted permission to test her insane chalk trick. The fate of the Atlantic convoys and her own career now hung in the balance. Back in the howling gale of December 10, 1941, Evie Reed stood on the bridge of HMS Bramble, the spray stinging her face, the words of her chalk trick echoing in her mind. U-552, Top's Red Devil, was closing fast. "Sonar, give me a precise bearing and range, and a course plot," Evie yelled over the wind. "Bearing 270, ma'am, range 500 yards, course approximately 090. Evie immediately pictured the scenario in her mind. Wind direction, west-northwest, force 8, waves 30-40 feet, terrain, open ocean, but the chaotic sea state offered excellent cover for the U-boat. Enemy psychology, Top would be confident, leveraging the storm to his advantage, expecting a standard depth charge attack once he closed the distance. "Helmsman, steady on course 010, speed 15 knots, Evie commanded. This put Bramble on a converging course with the U-boat, but crucially, slightly ahead of its current position. "Depth charge crew, prepare a single charge, set depth to 50 feet, stand by for release." The wind shrieked, threatening to rip the words from her mouth. The Bramble pitched and rolled violently, making any precision maneuver incredibly difficult. Evie gripped the binocular rail, her eyes fixed on the churning, featureless blackness where the U-boat lay hidden. Every instinct screamed at her to turn, to drop a full pattern, to follow the established doctrine. But she had to trust her numbers. "Sonar, new range. 450 yards, ma'am. Still 270, course still 090. "Right," Evie muttered to herself, "this is it." "Release marker charge," she bellowed. A dull thud vibrated through the ship as the first depth charge rolled off the stern. The timing was critical. It was dropped approximately 200 yards ahead of U-552's current position, designed to detonate in its path. "Hard to starboard, full rudder," Evie roared. "Come to course 120. The Bramble heeled over sharply, groaning under the strain. The goal was to quickly get outside the U-boat's immediate turning radius for the next 2 charges. "Sonar contact lost," the operator cried out, confusion in the water. This was expected. The marker charge had done its job, disorienting the U-boat. Now came the crucial part. "Prepare 2 charges, both 50 feet, stand by." Evie watched the clock on the bridge. She had calculated the precise intervals, accounting for Bramble's turning circle and the U-boat's likely speed and evasive maneuvers. The seconds stretched into an agonizing eternity. "Now release first heard charge." Another thud, another muted explosion. "Now release second heard charge." A third thud, a final deeper concussion that rattled the Bramble from stem to stern. 3 distinct, precisely placed shockwaves forming an invisible, terrifying triangle around the submerged U-boat. The chalk trick was complete. The world seemed to hold its breath. Below the waves, within the confines of U-552's pressure hull, chaos erupted. The first shallow charge, detonating unexpectedly ahead of them, had rocked the submarine violently, slamming crewmen against bulkheads. Before they could react, the second and third charges, seemingly from nowhere, exploded to port and starboard, creating a triple hammer blow of concussions. Lights flickered, instruments spun wildly, water began to spray from burst pipes. Surface, damage report," Erichtop roared, his face pale beneath his grizzled beard. He had expected a full pattern of depth charges directly overhead, not this staggered, terrifying sequence that made it feel as if the very ocean was collapsing around them. He believed, as Evie had predicted, that his U-boat was already critically damaged, its pressure hull compromised. Survival instinct took over. On the bridge of the Bramble, Evie, her heart pounding against her ribs, waited. The seconds stretched into minutes. The hydrophone operator remained silent, straining to hear anything above the storm. Doubt began to creep in, cold and insidious. Had she gambled too much? Had her insane trick failed, sending them straight into a torpedo attack? Then, through the howling wind and driving rain, a new sound. A faint but unmistakable roar. "Ma'am, noise bearing 285, sounds like blowing ballast tanks." Evie swung her binoculars to the bearing, straining her eyes against the darkness. The Bramble continued to heave, but her crew was focused, tense. Every pair of eyes searched the tumultuous sea. Suddenly, a darker shape emerged from the churning water, silhouetted against the pre-dawn gloom. The conning tower of U-552, glistening wet, began to rise, followed by the length of its sleek hull. It was listing noticeably to starboard, and from the base of the conning tower, a thin stream of steam, or perhaps smoke, could be seen escaping. U-boat surfaced, bearing 285, appears damaged, the lookout screamed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "Action stations, all hands, open fire." Evie's voice was a sharp crack cutting through the chaos. "Helmsman, bring us to port. Gunners, deck gun target U-boat conning tower, anti-aircraft guns suppress the bridge." The Bramble swung around, her 4-inch deck gun training on the exposed submarine. The U-boat crew, caught completely off guard, scrambled onto the deck, desperately trying to man their own gun, but they were too late. The Bramble's deck gun roared, a blinding flash in the darkness, followed by the ear-splitting shriek of the shell. The first round struck the base of the U-boat's conning tower, tearing a jagged hole in the metal. A secondary explosion rippled through the submarine as internal components ruptured. The U-boat's gunners, disoriented and wounded, managed a few desultory shots that splashed harmlessly into the water. The Bramble's smaller anti-aircraft guns raked the U-boat's deck, suppressing any further resistance. Another shell from the 4-inch gun struck amidships, directly into the pressure hull. A massive rupture, a geyser of water and black smoke, erupted. The U-boat lurched violently, its bow lifting as water flooded its stern. "Cease fire, cease fire," Evie ordered, her voice hoarse. The U-boat was clearly doomed. Its stern sank rapidly, the bow rearing vertically out of the water, a desperate final salute. Then, with a mournful, gurgling groan, U-552 slid beneath the waves, taking with it the notorious Red Devil Erich Top and most of his crew. The only evidence of its passing was the swirling foam and a lingering slick of oil on the tumultuous surface. The North Atlantic, momentarily, seemed to fall silent, save for the wind and waves. Evie stood transfixed, her breath fogging in the frigid air, the adrenaline finally beginning to subside. They had done it. Her insane chalk trick had worked. The sinking of U-552, a highly successful U-boat commanded by one of Germany's most feared aces, sent shockwaves through the German U-boat command. It was not just the loss of a submarine, but the manner of its loss that baffled them. Top's last garbled reports spoke of unexpected, multi-directional explosions that had rendered his boat uncontrollable. Word of Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Reed's chalk trick quickly spread through the Allied navies. Initially met with skepticism, its undeniable success led to its rapid adoption. Naval commands, desperate for any edge against the U-boat menace, began incorporating Evie's revised depth charge patterns into their anti-submarine warfare doctrine. The impact was immediate and profound. U-boat sinkings increased dramatically, and more importantly, more U-boats were forced to the surface, allowing surface ships to engage them with deck guns, saving precious depth charges for other targets. The psychological effect on German U-boat crews was significant. The element of surprise, their greatest advantage, had been nullified by Evie's innovative tactics. They could no longer predict where or how the attacks would come. Evie Reed continued to serve with distinction throughout the war, her brilliant mind contributing to numerous other tactical innovations. She became a quiet legend within the Navy, revered by the crews who owed their lives to her ingenuity. After the war, she dedicated her life to maritime safety and the development of navigational technologies, eventually becoming a highly respected professor of oceanography. Her legacy wasn't just in the U-boats she helped sink, but in the paradigm shift she forced upon naval warfare. She proved that intellect, unconventional thinking, and courage could turn the tide against seemingly insurmountable odds. She was a testament to the power of a single, brilliant mind to change the course of history, one precisely placed chalk mark at a time. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe to help us revive forgotten heroes.